Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this instalment, the Angry Birds are chucking themselves off your phone onto cinema screens in their own movie. Having dealt with rage all his life, Red, voiced by Jason Sudeikis, is sentenced to spend time in anger management, alongside Hyperfast Chuck, voiced by Josh Gad, the Explosive Bomb, voiced by Danny McBride, and Terrence, grunted by Sean Penn. When a boat full of pigs arrives on the Birds Island, led by Bill Hader's Leonard, Red is the only one who is suspicious of their new visitors, and with the help of Chuck and Bomb begin a trek to find Mighty Eagle, voiced by Peter Dinklage, to see if he can help them. Video game movies have a very checkered history. You only have to look at the likes of Super Mario Bros., Double Dragon, Street Fighter, both of them, to know that they generally don't tend to work out very well, even as lately as something like Hitman, which they've had 2 attempts at, and even Ratchet and Clank, which is basically a 90-minute cutscene. And I think the reason that video games don't tend to translate well to films is because the stories, the narratives in those games is generally there to shuttle you to the next set piece, the next level, the next boss battle. That's what it's there for, and the interactivity makes up for any shortfalls it has. The stories are inherently designed to be thin, because that's not the main purpose. The purpose is to play them. And thin could definitely describe the plot of a mobile phone game like Angry Birds. Although, to be honest, this movie's biggest accomplishment is they somehow managed to stretch out a 90-minute story for it. And in case you're wondering, yes, it is an origin story, because everything is an origin story these days. Because clearly, when we first started playing the game in 2009, the question of why are the birds so angry was just on the tip of our fingertips as we tapped on our phone screens. Presumably anyway. I don't really play mobile phone games, so I'm not really very familiar with this franchise. Although that's not really a shortcoming for this movie, because it's clearly aimed at people who are not really very knowledgeable about this game series, i.e. children. This is not really made for the adults that guiltily play a few rounds of the game. No, this is made for children who haven't been introduced to the game and is clearly there to indoctrinate them, to make them watch the movie, be entertained by it, and make them want to play the game afterwards. You basically feel, at all times during this movie, or at least I certainly did, like you're watching a product. You are watching a brand in action. This is basically what the movie is. And it feels like every decision it makes is something that has to be on brand. It has to be something that feels like something that should be in the video game. It feels like it has to have all the elements of the video game in there and somehow tie them into this story. And you've got to hand it to former Simpsons writer John Vitti, who previously wrote the Alvin and the Chipmunks movies, because he basically takes the template for a formula animated feature and applies the Angry Birds mold to it. At times it feels like he's filling in Mad Libs, trying to somehow explain all this crazy stuff that happens in the game in some logical semblance of a narrative. Like, why are the birds being slingshotted? Well, they're flightless. Do any of them fly then? That seems weird for birds. Well, Mighty Eagle can. Who gave them the slingshot in the first place? Well, you see, the pigs gave it to them when they came to their island and they tried to colonise it. That's basically what the movie feels like. There's a scene where Red's anger management tutor is chucked into the air and she suddenly starts firing fireballs out of her butt. You think to yourself, hang on a minute, that was never established at any point. She's just started doing that, and of course the reason that she's just started doing that is because that's something her character does in the game. Presumably. This movie is clearly aimed with younger viewers in mind, and you can tell because it's paced that way. It plays so fast, it's literally joke, 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 joke. There is a non-stop stream of either crude humour, slapstick, or puns just waiting around every single corner, and it is exhausting to watch as an older viewer. I found myself wondering if I was actually getting too old to be watching animated films, because this is the kind of movie that really makes me feel tired. And it doesn't help that it does feel like certain decisions within this film have been made from a marketing perspective. Josh Gad is in this movie and he plays Chuck, and he is the embodiment of this movie because he is this very, very hyper bird that can run at super speed. He reads his lines incredibly quick in this high-pitched, shrieking voice the entire time. Try to imagine Olaf from Frozen on crack impersonating Quicksilver from the X-Men films. There is a scene where he runs in at super speed, and that scene is quite fun, because admittedly, they are doing a little bit of a reference to Days of Future Past, not coincidentally around the same time as the new X-Men movie comes out. It does feel like Gad has been cast here because they want to get some of that Frozen money. He's basically doing the same character in many ways. And the pigs themselves have so clearly been designed with Minions in mind. Aside from Bill Hader's Leonard and a couple of the other pigs, a lot of them don't actually have specific personalities, they're just there in mass. They're big green blobs. What does that remind you of? And they're basically running around doing slapstick and slapping their bottoms, and it all feels like something that's basically going to be merchandised. And as you watch this movie and it's just throwing everything at you, I, funnily enough, started to side with Jason Sudeikis' Red. And Jason Sudeikis, he's quite funny in this movie. I think it's a little bit of a stretch, though, to call Red an angry bird. He's more of a disgruntled bird, if we're really being honest. He's not... I don't think he's really that angry. He has a short fuse, don't get me wrong, but he's mostly just sardonic and sarcastic. It does feel like that character is the one that adults who are dragged to this movie are probably going to most relate to, because he's the one who's always rolling his eyes at the shenanigans around him. Although, let's face it, he does have to put up with Chuck a lot of the time. Of course he's going to be rolling his eyes. Although what I really didn't like about that character is that they tried to crowbar onto him the stock message of not being selfish, that somehow he's entirely self-absorbed and that's where his rage comes from. And I'm thinking to myself, no. This particular trope does not work in this movie when the plot is that he is the only one who notices that the pigs are there for clearly nefarious purposes while everyone is running around like an imbecile just lapping up all their antics. And he's the only one who seems to notice that something's a little bit weird about them. That he's basically saving their society. That doesn't entirely strike me as being selfish. In some respects, he's being quite selfless, to be honest. And the only reason you could argue that he was being selfish is because the first thing the pigs do is knock down his house. I'd be pretty irritated if someone did that, to be honest. But I think as an older adult viewer, what it also lacks is it lacks that real subversive streak of something like the Lego Movie. You can tell that the Lego Movie, for better or for worse, has inspired all these brand extension films that are all in the pipeline at the minute. I don't think that any of them are going to come close to capturing what the Lego Movie does. And the Lego Movie really used that as a launching pad and really threw off the shackles of being some sort of branded merchandise extension and became something really smart and subversive and clever. And that's not to say that the Angry Birds movie doesn't have some clever moments. I think there is a lot of clever little bits in it, but there is so much being chucked at you that it's hard to really pick them out. Especially because this movie is loaded with puns, and it has this really uneasy mix of being this very kidified, bright, colourful movie, but it also has these jokes that are clearly aimed for adult audiences. There's a random reference to The Shining in this movie that happens out of nowhere and has nothing to do with anything. And I think parents are going to find it really awkward explaining to their kids lines like "pluck my life." Incidentally, don't look for that line in the UK version, because that was snipped out for a lower rating because it was just a little bit too edge for our local censors. It does feel like a lot of the time that the cast that they've assembled, although impressive, are largely here because doing voice work is quick and easy. And the only one that I quite liked from the supporting cast was Danny McBride as Bomb, and I think that's partly because of the design of the character, the way they've incorporated his feathers on the top of the design so that it looks like a fuse, so when he's getting angry it starts to light up. I thought that was a very cute touch. But you've got names in there like Maya Rudolph, Keegan-Michael Key, Kate McKinnon. You've got them in the supporting cast, Hannibal Buress, and they're all kind of wasted. They don't really get huge distinctive parts where you would recognise them or there is much value to having them there. I think the pinnacle of this thing is the casting of Sean Penn. Okay, it's quite funny that Sean Penn is in this movie, and I like how it's a play on his real-life persona, but other than that, there is no reason to have Sean Penn in this movie, because he has almost no lines in this film. His entire role is that he growls and he grunts. And yeah, that is amusing when you find out it's being voiced by Sean Penn, but that could have literally been played by anyone. The only other really notable voice talents in the film is Bill Hader as the villainous pig Leonard, who is having an absolute whale of a time just being allowed to ham it up, but also Peter Dinklage as Mighty Eagle. And to be honest, this does feel like it's a piece with his role in Pixels last year, where it feels like he's overplaying it somewhat. And this is despite the fact that Dinklage has a voice that's very well suited to animation, but he doesn't really add anything to this fairly stock character of this seemingly heroic figure who turns out to be this clumsy, incompetent oaf. The movie's also full of pop songs, because apparently family movies have to be these days, and so there's a soundtrack full of top 40 hits and recognisable numbers. There's a lot of songs that are basically used as cheap jokes in the background of scenes, perhaps no more so than the fact this movie has a Rickroll joke in it. I'm not kidding, there is an actual scene where Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up is on the soundtrack. Oh yeah, that happens, and it speaks to the sort of random pop culture referencing that's all over this thing. The movie's biggest strong suit is its animation. It's very big and bright and colourful and very distinctive, and it does a really good job of adapting the world of the game to film, and no more so than in the actual third act where they just start reenacting the video game. And that sequence is a lot of fun. It's the best thing in the film, and you want to know why? Because it's the bit that's least about storytelling considerations. It's not about trying to explain why the birds are so angry or why the pigs want to steal eggs. It's just being what Angry Birds is. But at the same time, as I say this, and despite the fact that watching those antics in 3D is a lot of fun, the fact that the best sequence in the film is basically a bit where they play the video game speaks to the fact that this is a franchise that doesn't really work on film. It's like the Doom movie where they did the first person sequence and everyone said that was the best bit in the film. Well, great, but I could have easily stayed at home and played Doom and not had to watch the terrible movie around it. And the Angry Birds movie isn't terrible, it's just so very, very mediocre, and that's kind of my issue with it. There is some inspired things about it, but there's a lot of things here that feels very lazy and very cynical. The Angry Birds movie may not be as awful as it could have been, but it's still a very by-the-numbers animated movie that is purely aimed at young viewers to try and sell the game to them. For anyone above the age of 10, they'll find the movie's hyperactive style very irritating, with Josh Gad's Chuck being especially annoying, and you'll likely find yourself siding with Jason Sudeikis' Red, whose jaded delivery brings the most laughs for older viewers. Jam-packed with puns, slapstick, pop songs and crude humour, there's none of the subversive streak of something like the Lego Movie despite the cast of comics and SNL veterans, and it's only in the final act when it starts enacting the game does it become fun. It's probably one of the best video game adaptations to date, but that really isn't saying much, and you'll probably get more enjoyment from playing a few rounds of the game. Coming up soon, I might finally review Idris Elba's Bastille Day, the X-Men face Apocalypse, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are coming out of the shadows. But until then, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.